I never should have gone down there. That's the thought that haunts me every night when I close my eyes. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel the chill of the basement air, the smell of damp concrete and stale dust creeping into my nostrils. It feels like the curse of that place is following me, infecting my every thought. I wasn't supposed to be in that house, not after everything that happened. But there I was, standing at the top of the stairs leading to the basement. My mind was a swirling mess of confusion and dread. I had just moved in, the place was inherited from an aunt I didn't even know existed until her death left me with the property. It was an old house, isolated in a part of town that seemed to have been forgotten by time. The neighbors didn't talk much. The air was always heavy, like the house itself was holding onto something it didn't want to let go. But I didn't believe in ghosts, not back then. I was practical, grounded in reality. I didn't believe in the stories the locals whispered about the house. They said it was cursed, that things had happened there, things that people refused to speak about. I didn't care for their superstitions. The house was mine now, and I was determined to make a fresh start. It was the basement that drew me in first. I had gone down there several times, mostly to check the utilities, to ensure everything was functioning. But on that night, something felt different. I don't know if it was the silence, the kind of silence that presses against your skin, or if it was the feeling that I wasn't alone. The basement was full of boxes and old furniture, things that had been left behind from previous tenants, things I had no interest in. Yet, there was a corner that always seemed darker, colder, no matter how many times I turned on the light. That corner, something about it made me uneasy. I would always hurry past it, but on this particular night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me. I had just finished checking the furnace when I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a door. It was tucked in the far corner, almost hidden behind an old wardrobe. At first, I thought it was just another closet, but there was something off about it. The door was old, weathered, its wood cracked and chipped as if it had been untouched for decades. But what really caught my attention was the lock. It was a heavy, brass lock, the kind you only see in places meant to keep things hidden, things meant to stay locked away forever. Against my better judgment, I approached the door. I remember feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as my fingers brushed against the lock. The air grew heavier, almost as if the house itself was holding its breath. I shouldn't have touched it. But I did. The lock clicked open with an unsettling ease, as though it had been waiting for me to open it. When the door swung open, I was met with an overwhelming stench, a mix of decay and rot, so strong it nearly knocked me to the floor. I recoiled, but something compelled me to look inside. The room was small, barely large enough to stand in, and it was filled with shelves upon shelves of what looked like bodies. I could barely make out their forms in the dim light, but there was no mistaking the shape of their stillness, their unnatural contortions. These weren't just old corpses, they were preserved in a way that shouldn't have been possible. The air in that room was thick with something that felt like death itself, a suffocating weight that I couldn't escape. I stepped inside, my heart hammering in my chest, my mind trying to deny what I was seeing. But the bodies were real. The eyes, blank, unseeing, stared back at me. They were arranged methodically, as though someone had taken great care in placing them there. I could feel the bile rise in my throat, my stomach turning at the sight. Then I saw it. The back of the room, behind a row of bodies, there was someone, standing in the shadows. I couldn't see it clearly at first, but I could feel its presence. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its silhouette twisted in ways that didn't make sense. Its eyes gleamed, reflecting the faint light of my flashlight. And then it moved. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in terror. But when I finally regained my senses, I was running. I didn't look back, not even once, as I bolted up the stairs, slammed the door behind me, and locked it. I didn't know what I had just encountered. But I knew it wasn't human. And it wasn't just a monster. It was something older, something that had been waiting for a long time. Waiting for me. After that night, things changed. The house seemed different. The silence grew deeper, heavier, as if it was alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the thing in the basement was waiting for me to return. And I could hear it sometimes, the scratching, the low growls, coming from the very walls of the house, echoing through the floors. Through my mind. I told myself I would leave. But I couldn't. There was something about that house, about the basement, that kept me there, trapped in its grasp. And then the dreams began. I don't know if the curse of that place is real or if I was just losing my mind, but I can feel it. Every night, it pulls me back. I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, and the stench of death still lingering in my nose. I don't know who did it, who opened the door. But I know it wasn't me. And I know that whatever was in there is still out there, waiting. I don't know when it started to feel like a curse, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more it consumed me. In the days after the incident in the basement, I tried to push it to the back of my mind. I buried myself in work, in meaningless distractions, telling myself that it was just my imagination. Maybe I had been sleep deprived, maybe the smell was just something that lingered from the old house, something I hadn't noticed before. But deep down, I knew I couldn't fool myself. The dreams didn't help. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that basement, staring at the door, feeling its pull. There was something about it, something that kept me connected to that room, as though it had left an indelible mark on me, something that couldn't be erased. The more I tried to forget it, the more the memory gnawed at me, eating away at my sanity. And every time I woke up, drenched in sweat, I could still smell it, death, rot, the kind of stench that sticks to your skin like oil. The worst part was the shadows. They were everywhere. At first, I thought it was just the old house, the way the light crept through the cracks in the walls, casting long, spindly shadows that twisted and danced in the corners of my vision. But it wasn't just the shadows of furniture, or the shadows cast by the trees outside. It was something else. It moved. It watched. I started seeing things. Little things at first. A figure standing at the end of the hallway, too tall, too thin. The glint of something in the corner of my eye, like eyes, staring at me from behind the walls. But when I turned to look, nothing was there. The more I tried to dismiss it, the more real it became. It followed me everywhere, lingering just beyond the edge of my sight. I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt its presence creeping closer. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It was real. And it was waiting for me. I knew I had to go back to the basement. I didn't want to. In fact, every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay away, to leave that cursed house and never look back. But there was a part of me that couldn't resist. I had opened the door, and now I had to face whatever had been unleashed. I had no choice. The second time I went down there, it was different. It wasn't the same basement I had run from. The air was colder, sharper, like a blade against my skin. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, pressing down from above, as though the house itself was alive, watching me, urging me forward. I stood at the top of the stairs, my hand gripping the railing, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know why I felt the need to go down there again. Maybe I thought I could face whatever it was, confront it, somehow make sense of it. But as I stepped onto the bottom floor, I felt a shift, a change in the air, as though the entire basement had transformed into something else. Something darker. The shelves, the bodies, I couldn't bring myself to look at them again. I turned my head away, but the air smelled of rot, of death, and I could almost taste the decay on my tongue. And then I saw it again. That figure. The one I had seen in my peripheral vision before. It was standing in the far corner of the room, just as tall as I remembered, but now I could see more. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, gray and withered, like something that had been dead for years. But its eyes, those eyes, gleamed in the darkness, reflecting the faint light of my flashlight. I froze. It didn't move. It just stared at me. I could feel its gaze burn into me, like it was studying me, waiting for something. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed by fear, my entire body trembling, and then I heard it. A voice. Soft at first, like a whisper carried on the wind, but growing louder. It came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew what it wanted. It wanted me to open the door again. It was like the house was calling to me, pulling me toward it. I could feel it in my bones, in my chest, that urge to obey, to open it, to see what was on the other side. I tried to resist. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that I wasn't hearing anything, that it was just the wind. But I couldn't fight it. I reached out, my hand trembling, and I found myself unlocking the door. When the door swung open, I expected to be hit with that same stench, that suffocating wave of decay. But instead, there was nothing. Silence. The room behind it was empty. I stepped inside cautiously, my flashlight flickering in my hand as I scanned the room. The shelves were gone. The bodies were gone. There was nothing but an empty space, an eerie stillness, but something was different. The air was thick, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. And then, I saw it, a figure, standing in the far corner. But it wasn't the same figure I had seen before. This one was different, distorted, like it had been twisted, reshaped by something unnatural. Its eyes were black, hollow, and as it stepped toward me, I could feel the temperature drop. The darkness seemed to swallow it whole, and it was closer, so much closer. Before I even had time to react, I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my body frozen in place. And then it reached out, its fingers long and thin, like claws, and I felt something cold grip my chest. My breath caught in my throat, and I knew that I was about to die, but I didn't die, not then. Instead, I was pulled back, dragged by some unseen force, as the door slammed shut behind me. I fell to the ground, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't understand what had just happened, or why I was still alive, but the curse, whatever it was, had already begun to take hold. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and fear. It's hard to say how long it's been since that night in the basement. Time seems to have lost all meaning. Each passing day feels like a never-ending cycle of dread, as though I've been trapped in some twisted nightmare from which I can't wake up. I tried to leave. I really did. I packed my bags, grabbed whatever I could, and stood at the front door, ready to walk away and never look back. But every time I reached for the doorknob, a voice would whisper in my ear, a voice I couldn't ignore, couldn't shake. It wasn't the voice from the basement, but it was something equally sinister. It was like the house itself had become a living entity, its tendrils of influence wrapping themselves around me, pulling me back inside. And then came the dreams. At first, they were fragmented, strange, a flash of the dark basement, the twisted figure standing just out of reach. But as the days passed, they grew worse. More vivid. More real. In the dreams, I was trapped in that same basement again, but this time I wasn't alone. The thing, whatever it was with me, its presence suffocating, oppressive. I couldn't escape it, couldn't move, couldn't even scream. I could only feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. It's in the waking moments, though, when the real horror sets in. It started small, things out of place, little objects that I didn't remember moving. The spoon that was left on the kitchen counter would be found in the bathroom. The shoes that I had set by the door would be missing, only to turn up in the living room. But it wasn't just the objects. It was the feeling, the sense that someone was in the room with me, watching me when I wasn't looking. I tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe I was just forgetting things. Maybe I was losing my mind, I told myself. But I knew better. The house was alive, and whatever had been unleashed when I opened that cursed door was only getting stronger. One evening, I finally cracked. I couldn't take it anymore. The silence, the oppressive weight of it all, it was driving me mad. I grabbed the flashlight, the one I'd used in the basement, and headed down to the basement again. I knew it was dangerous, I knew I shouldn't, but something inside me, something dark, something deep, urged me forward. I had to face it. I had to understand what was happening. The basement was colder than I remembered, the temperature dropping the moment I stepped onto the stairs. The smell of rot, of death, hit me almost immediately, stronger now, as if the house itself was trying to choke me out. I turned on the flashlight, it's been cutting through the darkness. I expected to see the twisted figure again, standing in the corner, its eyes locked on me. But there was nothing. It was just an empty room. Silent. Still, except it wasn't empty. I could feel it, the presence. The air around me was thick, suffocating. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but it was useless. The walls seemed to close in on me, the shadows shifting and twisting as though they had a life of their own. Every movement, every flicker of light, sent my heart racing. I couldn't see it, couldn't touch it, but I knew it was there. Watching. Waiting. I turned back to the door, the one I had opened before. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, the cold metal biting into my skin. I didn't want to open it again. I couldn't. But I had to. Something was driving me to do it, pushing me forward like a marionette on a string. The door creaked open slowly, the sound echoing through the basement, louder than I expected. It felt as though the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. And then it happened. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped into the room beyond the door. The space was different this time. The shelves, the bodies, they were back. But they weren't the same. They had changed, twisted, as though something had altered them, warped them into something darker, something far more sinister. The bodies, once lifeless, now appeared to be moving, twitching in the corners of my vision, their eyes half open, glazed over with a milky white film. They were alive, or at least, they were something in between, and then I saw it, the figure. But this time, it wasn't just one. There were more. Dozens of them, standing in the shadows, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. They were watching me, waiting for something. I could feel their presence, like a cold hand pressing against my chest. My heart was hammering in my ears, but I couldn't look away. I was frozen, my body unwilling to move, unwilling to react. They had me. It was then that I realized the truth. The curse wasn't just tied to their house. It wasn't just the door. It was me. I was the one who had unleashed it. I was the one who had opened the door, and now I was bound to it. Bound to the things that lingered in the shadows, the things that fed on fear, on misery. They were connected to me now, and there was no escaping it. The shadows moved. They closed in around me, the figures shifting and swaying as though they were circling, drawing me in. I tried to back away, but I couldn't. My feet wouldn't move. I couldn't run. There was no escape, and then, their voice. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was loud, clear, and it was coming from all directions. It spoke to me, spoke through me, as though it had always been inside me, waiting to break free. You shouldn't have opened the door, it said, its voice dripping with malice. Now you belong to us. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. My vision blurred, the darkness closing in, the figures reaching out, their fingers grazing my skin. I could feel their cold touch, their presence suffocating, as though I was being pulled into their world, into their darkness, and then, everything went black.